Welcome to the webinar on migrant workers, need for systemic change in law and policy. We have 6 speakers today, not 5. We have a bonus speaker as well. So we'll start it soon. Desmond Tutu had said once, and I am quoting him, there comes a point where we need to stop just pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they are falling in. So when Ramanuj suggested to do a webinar on this topic, focusing on solutions, this is what came to my mind. So I thought of sharing it with you all. Those who know me would know that I keep talking about collective future of ours. So late Professor Madhav Menon had asked me to design a course and teach justice as a part of curriculum. So I started reading Michael Sandel a lot. Many of you would be aware of his Harvard course on justice. So in one article, he writes that our political arguments tend to revolve around welfare and freedom, how to increase the economic output and respect people's rights. Now, but when you talk about a just society, you need something more than this. So that something more, according to him, is reasoning together what justice should be, what a good life should be, the good life, in fact, as Dawkins would call it. So then, when you talk about say, the financial issues that the country is facing, whether it be of bailouts or the growing gap between rich and poor. So you'll find competing interests of different groups of common good. So he says it's even if we don't agree on the meaning of what good life is, we still need to reason together and have a shared conception of what justice is and what civic virtues are. So therefore, let's have this conversation today around the issue of migrant workers and see if we can develop a shared conception that would pave the way towards the solution. Now, WTO report of 2019 says that we had around 450 million internal migrants way back in 2011. It's only now that in the wake of COVID crisis that this issue has been brought forward, but some of it may have been there even before. So this conversation focuses on how to have a systemic approach, how to approach it in a manner so that it provides a viable and a sustainable solution that can go on even after the pandemic is over. So let me introduce you to our speakers for the day. We have Mr. Sanjay Ghosh. He's a labor law expert. He has been practicing over 2 decades now. May he practice for many, many more decades. He is also the additional standing counsel for the state of for government of National Capital Territory of Delhi. So he would begin first, and in case you have any questions for him, you can ask him immediately because he may have to leave there. Then we have Mr. Indu Prakash Singh. He has been working for the rights of homeless people for a very, very long time. He has just raised his hand, if you could see. He is the facilitator of City Makers Mission International. He's also the national convener of National Forum for Housing Rights and a member of state-level Shelter Monitor Committee. We welcome you, sir. We then have Mr. Vishnu Shankar Jain, my friend and an advocate on record who has appeared in many important and leading matters. Then we have Professor Sunita Reddy. She is an associate professor of JNU. She specializes in medical anthropology and has done quite intensive studies on migrant workers in domestic and construction sector. We also have Ms. Rama Priya Gopalakrishnan. She is a lawyer in Madras High Court. She also specializes in labor law and has been associated with ILO for 16 years now. We have Mr. Aman Madan also. He is a practicing lawyer. He is a partner at Chamber of Legal Solutions and is a panel lawyer of providing legal aid with DSLSA. So over to you, Sanjay. Sanjay, you have been working for such a long time. If you could tell us a bit about what laws are applicable to migrant workers, and do you think some changes are required in them, not just generally, but also in the context of the COVID crisis?
Thank you, Shanchita. Can you hear me?
Yes, Sanjay.
Okay. Very good evening to all the participants of this webinar. This is my first webinar. I've tried to avoid them like the plague, but unfortunately now I am stuck with one. And it's a pleasure to have Shanchita invite me and preside over this because it's a very important issue. Well, let's get straight to the point about migrant workers and the laws. I'm sure that many of us in India were surprised as to the extent of migrant workers working in our cities. And it's only because of the corona crisis that we got to know. And when we saw in our TV channels, in our newspapers, scores and scores of these workers moving and walking and their tales of being stuck in bus stops and stations, that we realized that a substantial part of our industries are actually powered by migrant workers. Now, everyone knows we are at the fag end of the middle of a pandemic, so everyone knows all the issues which have arisen, and I'm not going to be repeating all those issues. But the important point to understand is that the migrant workers are ordinary workers, but having the migrant status, and I will explain what I mean by that. All the labor laws, and we all agreed that there are many labor laws. There are plethora of labor laws. Even the people who are working for workers, trade unions, they also agree with the employers that there are too many laws, many confusing laws, and there is a lot to be said about implementation of these laws. Which is why this government was bringing about the simplification in the form of 4 labor codes. Now, the issue which we have to understand is the way in which the system responded to this crisis. And from the way you see how the system responded to the crisis, you will know exactly what are the flaws in these labor laws. And I will make my points very briefly about what I propose is the way forward. Now, firstly, as you know, the entire thing, this entire lockdown was done at a 4-hour notice. Also, ham-handedly, various notifications were brought. One notification was brought saying that the workers have to be paid during this period. Then, of course, that notification lapsed and these issues are in court. Now, even certain states like Uttar Pradesh, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Orissa have come out with their various versions of trying to dilute labor laws with the understanding that these labor laws will inhibit growth, will inhibit the restarting of these industries after the pandemic is over. Now, let's quickly come to this point. The point over here is that in all other countries, what has happened is that the governments of the day have given a lot of grants, have given a lot of economic concessions to the employers to be able to restart their industries and also to pay the workers. Now, what has happened in India is that nothing of that sort has been done, or whatever is allegedly done is actually not coming out in reality. And instead, what the governments have done is held out a message that if you remove these workers and make it easier to remove these workers, it is somehow going to encourage the industries to revive. Now, let's understand the important issues of the migrant workers. I will come to those laws which govern all the workers, like the Building and Construction Workers Act, but let me start with the Migrant Workers Act. Now, the only law which deals with migrant workers as migrant workers and not as general other workers is the Interstate Migrant Workers Act of 1979. Now, this law had a social economic context. And this law was meant to address a particular socio-economic problem, namely the problem of Dagan labor from Orissa, where contractors would take these labor and they would be taken from the home states and it would be taken to the receiving states. So this Migrant Workers Act of 1979 at that time, which came through a Supreme Court judgment and a parliamentary committee, was revolutionary because it said that a lot of rights are given to these migrant workers, including the right to be sent back, repatriated by train to their domestic, their home states, the states from where they came. Also, there were rights to regulate the contractors who would bring these workers over there from the home state to the host state, registration of those contracts, also registration of those migrant workers, keeping their records, and even dealing with as minute things like if the migrant worker was forced to enter into any agreement with indebtedness, even that debt would be wiped out when the migrant worker would be going back. Now, what happened over time, like with many laws, is our society, our employers became faster and smarter than laws. For example, as you know, minimum wages. Minimum wages was a law which everyone honored in flouting. So many states tried to ensure, like Delhi had an enactment, that minimum wages have to be given electronically. That is, you have to electronically bank transfer minimum wages. But employers have come up with ways around that also. And you hear stories of how the bank transfer is done in the morning, and in the evening, the same worker withdraws the money from the bank and gives back that little portion back to the employer. So in India, we are very good in exploiting laws, in going around laws. So the Interstate Migrant Workers Act has actually become useless because the entire basis of the Interstate Migrant Workers Act is that the contractor will bring the worker from the host state to us from the originating state to the receiving state. So over time, what happened is people realized that this is creating a lot of problems, creating a lot of confusions, complications. So what was done was they simply eliminated this receiving, collecting in one state and bringing to another state. They simply said, I will only take in my state. And they went around the entire mechanics of the Interstate Migrant Workers Act, and this law, which provided for so many things like residence for migrant workers, other benefits for migrant workers, have been rendered useless. And we saw that even while going back, hardly any employer made any arrangements for sending back these workers. The Migrant Workers Act also says that governments will be responsible if the employer fails. And you know, the government's Shramik Express came much, much later after thousands of workers had walked hundreds of kilometers on their bare foot. Now, coming back quickly, Sanchita, a lawyer can go on speaking, and I don't want to take the time of other people. So how much time do I have? Just tell me quickly, because I want to just, shorten my responses so that others can also speak.
I think so you have to shorten. You have already crossed your...
Then let me just let me wrap up with just 2-3 minutes. I'm sorry I took the time of other people. So now what is being done with regard to the laws? Now, implementation has been made an issue. But if you see the way implementation happens, implementation is something which is manipulated again by the employers, because the employers have all the inspectors, the factory inspectors are under their control. So what is required for future, and I'll end with this, and whatever people can ask questions, what is required is to ensure the registration of workers uniformly, like Building and Construction Workers Act. Why does a building and construction worker have to go to every state and keep registering? If I know labor laws are state subjects, but this is a time to give a worker a one registration, a one number. You are having Aadhaar, you are having all these things. That is one thing to do, is to give him an identity, link it with his bank account so that the money gets directly transferred to that person. Also, yes, labor laws are cumbersome in regard to exit, in regard to closure. But the solution is not what these governments are saying, is that remove all the protections. The solution has to be midway, where you will have to hold the hand of small and middle level employers, and at the same time at the same time protect the workers. Now, another thing has been said about informal sector. Now, informal sector, there's already an Unorganized Workers Act, and that act is from 2008 onwards till now not even been operationalized. So therefore, time has now come to actually take a humanistic view and to take a middle view. And the only way that can be done is when you carry all the stakeholders along and don't give the impression that you are trying to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay. There's a question for you, just in case you leave after this. So let me ask you this question. According to recent, first question is, many states are with MOUs. How could this help in dealing with the crisis of internal migration in India?
No, MOUs with regard to what? Because you see, now the Supreme Court also in the case which is dealing with the migrant workers has said that every state has to get the registration done, and this is a very positive thing, to register the migrant workers, because they all go under they slip in the cracks. They are not recognized. So they have to be registered, they have to be skill built, and they have to be placed, and they have to be rehabilitated. So we can have MOUs, we can have everything on paper, but the proof of the pudding is in the eating. What actually is being done? How are these people being rehabilitated? I have not seen even till date, other than some states who have used the funds of Building and Construction Workers Act only again for building and construction workers, but the direct transfer of some kind of amounts to these migrant workers still has not happened till now. Also, money being directly taken from their unpaid wages, directly being taken and attached from the employer's account by the state and transferred to these workers has still not happened. The Supreme Court has said, why don't we negotiate to the employers and to the workers? But unfortunately, the employers and the workers are not equal parties. So it is not, their bargaining power is not the same. So I don't know how they are going to negotiate and agree to receiving less wages or to work for less wages.
Thank you, Sanjay. I think we'll move on to the next speaker now. We'll take the questions at the end. Mr. Indu Prakash Singh, over to you now. Can we unmute him? Bhavna, can you please? He's unmuted.
Yeah, it's got
now.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Singh. Mr. Singh.
Yeah, thanks a lot, for inviting me for this very important webinar on migrant workers' need for systemic changes in law and policy. And I think thank you, Sanjoy, I think for bringing in the law. And we all know that the law is practiced more in default, than practiced for the welfare of the people. And so I don't want to come to that. I just want to come quickly to, my turf. Because for the last 20 years, I've been working with the homeless people in Delhi and other parts of the country. We call them city makers, or the village makers, or the nation makers. So they are, government calls them migrants, government calls them laborers, government calls them workers. For us, they are city makers. They have made the city with their sweat and labor, and they have every right to the city. Okay, and from there I come that what needs to be done is very clearly, as I think Sanjay was talking about, that we need to have, they have brought in Aadhaar and everything. They wanted to facilitate, cash transfers and all that, but nothing of that sort is really happening in a big way. So if we have one person, one ID, where we also require convergence of entitlements to these people, whether it's workers, pensions, it's workers' entitlements, BOCWA rules, or Migrant Workers Act, whatever benefits that accrue to them should be coming to them as such, So the time has come. Of course, I think is what has happened during the COVID times between April and May 2020. I think it has been, I would say, a real partition, which shows the real phase between the rich and the poor. The partition of the nation between rich and the poor, where the rich, the government supported the rich people and totally forgot about the poor people as such, You're marching on the roads to go back to your home, they're not bothered. Railways gives 150 crores to PM Cares, and PM Cares doesn't care at all about the people. So if you're talking about caring about them now, my suggestion is that we need to have portability of all the entitlements and of all the rights. The person might come from UP to Delhi, but the ration card the person might be having applies only to UP. Why not to Delhi? So we had this huge issue because I'm also a member of the advisory panel for Delhi government on COVID relief. And oh, there's music going on here, you know. So, you know, and we realized as to how people without ration cards needed to be given ration. So the government came up with e-coupons and all those things. So we were there to handle these issues. But if a person has, now people have got Aadhaar cards and all, why couldn't they have got ration cards as such? And why couldn't they have various, rights as such? I think so that's one issue. The other thing is, you know, like, in fact, you know, Sanjay was talking about that the Interstate Migrant Workers Act of 1979 talks about that if the person is indigent, is not able to support, then the various government departments need to support them. The contractor is, is responsible for that, is accountable for that. The person goes back to home with dignity. Now, here we had railways who could donate 150 crores to the PM cares, but could not make railways free for they called it Shramik trains. But what was Shramik train? It actually was an agonizing journey for many people, you know, with no food, no water, nothing in the trains. Many reached home, but they died in the trains because they didn't get food. So I think the danger today is that, you know, which I think Sanjay also raised and other friends also talk about, is that the government is using the ploy of that economy is actually in doldrums. We are faring very bad. So we need to dilute labor laws. I think if the government does that, it is going to actually massacre the labor laws and massacre the migrant workers in en masse, you know, which we have to not allow at all. And use every legal resource, every legal stuff possible to ensure that the rights of the informal sector workers, of the city makers, of the village makers and nation makers are defended time and again. The next one I want to say is that we have got so many departments, huh? Like we have got a labor department, a women and child department, a social welfare department, and each talking about important segments as such. Why don't we converge services for people who are migrants, who are city makers, you know, who actually have nothing as such? So maybe the time has come where I think, if suppose, we're talking about, the state of, the place of origin and the place of destination where the people go to, I think maybe the very step of registration should happen at the point of origin. In the various panchayats, in the various gram sabhas, in the panchayat samitis and districts and all, every person should be registered, every worker should be registered, man or a woman or whatever, who is traveling to these places. The contractor should be registered. Only then they can be allowed to take the migrants with them. That's important, you know. Migrant Workers Act very clearly says if the contractor is not registered, the contractor can be penalized. You know, so we don't follow the laws actually. The problem is that. So how is it that we can make things work now? One is the laws that are there, labor laws that are there, let us follow it in principle, in word by word, then diluting it. Two is, how is it that we can make, the various laws that are there for them applicable so that the life of the worker becomes better, be it in the village or be it in the city, so that nobody, now they've gone back and there are many people sending them buses and all to bring them back. Hey, where the hell were you when they wanted to go back home and you didn't take care of them, didn't pay them as such? Now you want them back because without they coming back, your industry does not work at all. So if only the society had taken care of them in distress, because we know for sure the people, like we work with the homeless, anybody who comes to the city is not coming for an opportunity, is coming because there's a distress in the place of origin. Because of caste atrocities, what happens with Dalits and all, and Muslims and all in the country, there are religious rights happening and all those things. There are floods happening, man-made disasters, natural disasters, due to which people come due to distress. And instead of we handling it properly, we further actually, this time they're going back was, I would say, extreme distress that they went by, and It was life-threatening for many of them. Many died on the way, on the roads, in accidents, on railway tracks and all that. I think if we learn the lessons right now, we should not be repeating this second partition between rich and poor, between the the Savarnas and the untouchables, between the Dalits and the all these people as such. So I want to say here that the problem is somewhere our union government, I want to say upfront here bluntly, miserably failed, or was basically part of the problem that got created. And imagine the mockery that the Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, makes by calling it Tyag of the migrant workers. You force them to walk miles and miles, children and women and men walking with their feet bruised and, they can't walk properly, accents and all. And then you call it Tyag. What rubbish are we talking about? I think people have had enough of Tyag. Time for the nation has come now to really respect every worker, and every worker who has died. Why don't we pay them compensation of 1 crore? They have died on the fronts of our economy, of sustaining a city, of sustaining a village and sustaining a nation. They equally are valuable. The child, the woman, the son, the father, whatever. I think we'll take care of that. And then a bit I want to also add here, we talk about National Skill Development Corporation, all those things, NSDC is there. If the people have gone back to the villages, why don't we create resource centers where, the people are registered, they are provided the requisite skills as per the market so that they are able to get better incomes, instead of just being a builder, they get skilled as such, they become Raj Mistris or whatever. Instead of just being a normal plumber, there are plumbers who are very efficient. The prior knowledge gets certified by NSDC and they earn higher incomes. So somewhere, you have LabourNet in Bangalore and Hyderabad. You have, Urban Clap and all. So I think maybe these apps and all should be used to register the people so that they get better incomes now. The thing is, not that they don't work. For me, I make a very clear, description of poverty in India. Poverty is inversely proportional to prosperity. So the more rich you get, that the doubly poor the people are getting. So we need to stop this process. I think you began by saying that there is a gap between rich and poor. How is it that we bridge the gap between the rich and the poor? The migrant workers crisis has just shown that if you don't bridge the gap, we are going to see more and more crises. And I would say, at least some of us don't have the heart to see this now. We need to assuage the feelings. Maybe it's a national disaster. And COVID has taught us to look back, reflect on it, and do a lot of soul searching and improve our ways of functioning, plug in the implementation gaps and the very Humpty number of schemes that are there to say very good schemes, but not being implemented at all on the ground. So I think these are a few quick things I have to say. I think, I'll come back if there are more questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Mr. Singh. Thank you. Let's move on to our next speaker, Vishnu. Vishnu, if you're ready, you can start.
Yeah, I'm ready. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, loud and clear.
A very good evening to everyone, and especially many thanks to Sanchita for organizing such an important issue and such an important webinar on such an important issue. As Mr. Sanjay and other speakers who have spoken prior to me have in detail told various aspects and the various pitiable conditions which the migrant workers have gone through, I would like to bring to the knowledge of everyone that socialist word was added in our constitution by 42nd Amendment in the year 1976. And there was a specific purpose of introducing socialist word in the preamble of the constitution. Because if we see the original constitution, socialist word was not there in our constitutional regime. But in the year 1976, for the very first time by 42nd Amendment, during the time of emergency, the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had introduced the word socialist in our constitution. And what does socialism mean? And that's precisely what was just being spoken by my senior, that socialism means that there should be no gap between the rich and the poor. The state should endeavor that both the ends should meet, and there should be a society which believes in welfare society and which establishes a role model for the entire country, so that the city makers, he has used a very important word, the city makers, that the city makers should not be treated in such a way which has been done in the situation in hand. Now, Mr. Sanjay has also spoken about the laws in detail. There are many laws which we can keep on elaborating and going on and on. But the very important aspect which I want to bring to everyone's knowledge are two very important features of labor law, and which are the key highlights. The first is Article 43 of the Constitution of India. Article 43 of the Constitution of India says that the state shall endeavor to secure by suitable legislation or economic organization or in any other way to all the workers, agriculture, industrial or otherwise, work a living wage, conditions of work, ensuring a decent standard of life and full enjoyment of leisure and social, full enjoyment of leisure and social and cultural opportunities. And in particular, the state shall endeavor to promote cottage industry on an individual and cooperative basis in rural areas. Now, there are so many labor laws which have been enacted by the central government, by the state government till date. But let me tell you that there is no law, not a single law, which has been enacted for dealing with the various conditions of service and for dealing with the leisure and social cultural opportunities of the migrant laborers. And there's one more important aspect to it. If someone will look at Article 31C, it says that if any law has been made for giving effect to any of the provisions of the directive principles of the state policy, it will not be deemed to be inconsistent. So if the central government or the state government, as the case may be, makes a law for giving them, as the words which are used in Article 43 are very important, if a state or the central government makes a law for giving effect to a decent standard of life with full enjoyment of leisure and social and cultural opportunities to the migrant laborers, I think this situation from 1950 till 2020, 70 years have passed by, this situation wouldn't have arisen. So definitely there has been a lacuna in the law, and definitely there has been a lacuna in the implementation of the laws. There is no doubt about it. We can't shy away from it. Having said that, there is one more important provision which has been introduced in our constitution by way of Article 43A in the directive principles of the state policy, which say that the state shall take steps for suitable legislation in any other way to secure the participation of workers in the management and undertaking. So the constitutional scheme and the constitutional regime is twofolded. The first regime and the Article 43, it says that the state has to put proper endeavor and has to implement proper laws so that suitable conditions, proper conditions, social conditions, cultural conditions can be introduced for the laborers. Apart from that, they have to be brought into the system. They have to be given proper employment in every undertaking. For that also laws has to be brought. Now my question is, what has given or what has led to all the governments, whether it is Narendra Modi government, whether it is Congress government, whether it is Akhilesh government, Mayawati government, let us not go into the politics of this. The thing is, when we are talking about implementation and when we are talking about the policy, we should not target a particular government or a leader. We should target the policy making. If what has led to the various authorities for not bringing laws in terms of Article 43 and 43A is my question, which everyone should think and ponder upon in this webinar. Apart from that, one very crucial aspect which we all have to look into, as Sanjay has told very in detail and extensively, that there is BOCW Act, which has brought various provisions, which has a complete scheme in itself for construction workers. Now, everyone will be shocked to know that BOCW Act applies to industries or to organizations which hire 10 or more workers. To them only this act applies. So if any organization or any individual is hiring migrant workers or any labor who is less than 10 in number, then they are taken away from the purview of the act. So there is always some kind of lacuna which has been kept in the legislation so that the employers can play with these acts. So this is a very important aspect. Apart from that, what Sanjay has mentioned, he has mentioned a very good point, that registration, the obligation of registration, somehow or the other in all these acts have been kept on the laborers to go and register under this act. Now, how can you imagine, how can you expect from a person who is living in a very pitiable and a difficult condition to go to an authority and get himself registered? So many questions will be asked and so many answers he has to give. So these acts are not practically implementable, is my second point which I would like to say. Apart from that, there are funds which are made in these acts, that these funds have to be given to the worker. Till date, there is no such implementation which we have seen, as my learned senior was also saying, that these funds have been directly transferred or not, or has been given or not. So there are implementation aspects so far as fund transfer is concerned. Then hours of work and overtime have been regulated by these acts. So BOCW Act I'm talking. So when these act has been brought into force, you will be shocked to know that there was a writ petition in the Supreme Court under Article 32. And the name of the case is National Campaign Committee for Central Legislation on Construction Labor versus Union of India, 2018 5 SCC 607. Now this very specifically says, and it was shocking for everyone, that the Supreme Court said that till date, there are so many states who have not even framed rules for implementation of BOCW Act under Section 62 of the Act. So there are so many states which are in default, which have not even introduced the rules to carry out the provisions of the Act, because we all know that the rules are made to carry out the provisions of the Act. Now, there are so many states which have not brought out rules to carry out the provisions of the Act. The Supreme Court also criticized that in a welfare state, there has to be funds for all these migrant laborers. Till date, there are no funds for these migrant laborers. Apart from that, Supreme Court also said that Section 11 registration of workers is not done. So all those workers who are coming from various parts of the country and who are trying to be city makers, who are trying to build the cities, if they have been not registered within the scheme of the Act, then obviously the benefit of the Act won't be applicable to them and they will be in the same condition. So my suggestion is, after having an extensive study of all these laws and all these things which are in operation as of now, that there has to be a unified law. You cannot diversify between migrant laborers. You cannot differentiate between construction workers. You should have and you must have a unified law, and there is a specific entry. It's in the concurrent list. The labor works and the migrant works is in the concurrent list. It's list 3, entry 3, list 3, item 24, which says that the central government or the state government, as the case may be, can bring laws for proper implementation of the same. And being it in the concurrent list, I propose and I feel, and my solution and suggestion is that every state government or the central government, as the case may be, has to bring a unified law so far as the funds are concerned, so far as the registration is concerned, so far as the interstate movement of the migrant workers or the laborers are concerned, and so far as their opportunity for cultural and social opportunity is concerned, as mentioned under Article 43 of the Constitution of India. And there has to be, either today, tomorrow or someday, a one-piece legislation for implementation of Article 43 of the Constitution of India. Though directive principle of state policy is not enforceable, but if the state makes law for implementation of directive principle of state policy, then it cannot be challenged on the touchstone of Article 14 and 19. And that's a very important protection which has been given to directive principle of state policy by virtue of Article 31C. So my suggestion is that there has to be uniformity in law, and there has to be a one control body which will monitor the interstate movement of the migrant workers, and which will see that they are registered and they are paid appropriately. Apart from that, recently the Supreme Court was dealing with the issue of migrant workers, and for the state of UP, let me tell you that 25 lakh laborers within a span of 10 days was brought in the state, and 11 lakh laborers were shifted from the state to the other states by the government. And apart from that, what the UP government has done is because most of the migrant laborers and the workers who go in various states are from UP and Bihar. They are the major chunk of it. And UP, especially when this pandemic situation came, they have tried to deal with this situation at the war level. There was a special war room in the CM office, and there were all the chief secretaries and everyone was involved, and everyone was trying to do the best they can do for this
Vishnu,
issue.
if you may please wrap it up a bit.
Yeah, I'm just wrapping up. So the issue is that the UP government has made shelter homes. The special buses have been made free of cost by UP SRTC. There are home quarantines with ration kit and 1,000 rupees to every migrant worker, and 1 lakh were sent by to the other states by train. So these are so my point is that every state and every government is trying to do the best which they can do, and someday or the other Article 43 has to be implemented. Thanks a lot, Sanchita, for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this webinar.
Thank you, Vishnu. And we can now move on to our next speaker, Professor Sunita Reddy. If you may please unmute her, Bhavna. So, Professor Reddy, BOCW Act has been covered by our previous speakers, but you can definitely add your own views on it.
Thank you so much, Sanchita. Good evening to all. Today, I'll be speaking a little bit from social science dimension, being an anthropologist and working in public health. And my core area of research has been on disasters. Disasters actually give a lot of opportunities to think and rethink. And we have seen that disasters actually further discriminate. And it's also the most vulnerable sections are the ones who are worst affected. And the social fissures which are already there in the communities further widen. So this very well was expected even after pandemic, and to an extent that this pandemic was not anticipated at all by any government or any disaster professionals, given that the whole world was affected. And thereby one can see all the fallouts. Of course, as I said, vulnerable sections were further marginalized because of this pandemic. Since BOCW Act has been spoken, I'll just briefly touch upon that little later, but the point is our two studies in Delhi, we specifically looked at marginalization of workers, both domestic and construction workers, and gender aspects of it. BOCW Act actually is based on the cess funds which are collected from the construction companies, small or big. 1 to 2% of their profits are collected as cess funds, which are mandated for the welfare of the construction workers. For safety, for their health, and for their many other aspects. There are 18 schemes under the cess fund, which they are supposed to utilize. But unfortunately, every state in their own banks have crores of rupees meant for the welfare of the construction workers, but hardly it's been used. I wanted to actually share a small PPT, a table actually, looking at the construction workers, the amount of money which is there and how it has been used. Unfortunately, if you can you see the screen here? Sanchita, can you see the screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I just wanted to say that BOCW Act collects funds. The cess funds are there with every state. And if you look at this table, especially state-wise collection of cess funds and the amount spent. Now I'm highlighting this because funds are already there for construction workers. And while the migrants were moving out of the cities back to their homes, this fund could have been easily utilized, though it was supposed to be utilized in normal times, but which was not done. Even during the disasters, these funds were not used. So if you look at most of the states, and especially interestingly, the developed states like Andhra, Gujarat, Maharashtra, their collection of cess funds is quite high, but utilization is not that much, except for Kerala. And if you look at Kerala, it's almost the money they have collected, they have spent. And if you look into the labor laws there, it's very much in favor to the labor. And as the states can design their own labor laws further to facilitate, and one can see that most migrant workers reach to Kerala for work. Now, starting from Leh Ladakh to Kerala, you'll find labor coming from Bihar or Madhya Pradesh or West Bengal. And if I have to be, not to be a politically correct, I say the underdevelopment of the states actually leads to the national development. And you can see the labor, even in the Leh or even the Kerala, coming from Bihar, going to these states. So look at the amount of money which is there already in the banks, but unfortunately it's not being spent. And I had long discussions with many of our colleagues who are in labor departments, and there were many reasons for them to say that why it is not being used. But again, a quick look into the wages, both whether it's equal wages or even gender-based, whether man and woman getting same wages, or when you look at the minimum wages. So this minimum wages, the table shows 2017 figures. So unskilled was supposed to get 513 rupees per day. But two of our studies in 2015 and 17, none of the workers in 3 construction sites and 9 districts in different busties we inquired with the migrant workers, they were getting around 250 maximum. And today, if you look at in 2020, the minimum wages for unskilled is 14,842 per month. This is minimum wages. So none of the cities are paying the minimum wages. Now that's a different issue, though we can keep on increasing the minimum wages, but unless it's implemented, there's no point. So now I wanted to just highlight on schemes, 18 schemes under which they have fellowships for children, starting from class 1 to even professional colleges, where 5,000 rupees a child of a labor can get. But if the child and the family is in Bihar and the person is working in Delhi, they cannot transfer the money. Now, why is that? As other speaker had told, that with this unique IDs, and if we can create a unique ID and with Aadhaar and banks connected, we can very well support the children wherever they are studying. And there are other schemes like compensation for buying implements, for making a home. There are provisions, 18 schemes which are meant for them. And in our study, we could find that more than 85% of the labor population were not even aware of this act and these funds. Now, my simple suggestion was that why not at every construction site, a board with all these details be mandated? And this can be done, it's very easy, but then why is it we are not able to do it? Maybe since we are addressing to the lawyers and the judges, it would be very simple to put it as mandatory to keep a board with all these details so that they get to know about it. So even when we discussed with the Labor Department, they said we have spent crores of rupees in campaigning. So 1 time or 2 time campaigning is not enough. I think this is everyday knowledge or the information which the labor has to know. So that's 1. And 2, even the scholarships can go. Women mostly in construction workers are head loaders. And now with mechanization, most of the women are also out of jobs. And once the woman is not in a physical condition, so she moves to construction work, to domestic work. Now, when we have RPL, when we are training so many people, and during the RPL also, we have seen that women are not being trained. Most of the women are not being trained. So why not we can train them, and women can fly jets? Why not train them in masonry? Why not train them painting and many other aspects of it? So, and one more point I want to highlight is that women and children are to be seen as one unit. And most women work leaving their children back, or they are there with the woman at the construction site, making very hazardous. So at that point of time, having creche facilities at the work site, and even the Anganwadi centers, I've been advocating that why not we have Anganwadis full day, from morning 9 to evening 6, so that parents who go and work can leave their children safe. And you have seen that Delhi has the highest missing children. And of course, every day you read about the assaults on young children. So these things can be taken care. So I think these are all which can be practically done. And in spite of having so many adverse news, we are still so thick-skinned that we are not able to implement them. I think we really need to introspect, rethink, have empathy, and then work for the people. And now that most of the workers have gone back, why don't we then generate employment in their own home states? That will develop the states also. And Manrega can be multiplied, and the unskilled labor can be given skills, and then smaller towns can be developed. And further, what we can think of is to go beyond the manual labor in what you call under Manrega. So skill development should also be included in the Manrega, and also self-help group women can come out and work on their own, giving importance to rural development. Given that disaster being an opportunity now, we need to really think through many angles and see how do we take care of the migrant workers. As one of the speaker was saying, they had sent buses, not just buses, they had sent aeroplane and tickets for them to bring back. So that's the worst thing which we can think of, that you are not even aware when they're walking, bleeding. So this is all the kind of apathy we have for the people who are working for us. So these are some of the points. I couldn't show the other points, but then I think don't have much time. I'll take up questions if they are there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Reddy. If you could stop sharing your screen now. Yeah. Our next speaker is Ms. Rama Priya Gopalakrishnan. Really thankful for agreeing to come at this short notice, ma'am.
Good evening, everybody. Am I audible?
Yes.
First of all, I'd like to thank Sanchita for inviting me to be part of this webinar. I'd like to begin by saying that the COVID-19 crisis and the plight of the interstate migrant workers pursuant to the imposition of the nationwide lockdown on March 25th has brought to the fore various inadequacies in the law and policy relating to migrant workers. As speakers before me have pointed out, the principal piece of central legislation governing the conditions of work of migrant workers is the Interstate Migrant Workmen Act of 1979. Now, if you look at the very definition of interstate migrant worker under this act, it defines a migrant worker as a person recruited by or through a contractor for in one state for employment in another state. So it applies only to interstate migrant workmen who are recruited through intermediary contractors. So if interstate migrant workmen, assuming a group of them were directly to go to another state and work in a factory, they will not be covered by the act if they are not employed through a contractor. So that itself is a shortcoming in the law. Then secondly, the law applies only to establishments where 5 or more interstate migrant workers are employed and to contractors employing 5 or more interstate migrant workers. So assuming that there are 4, many factories are artificially and many units are artificially split into smaller units. So if there are only 4 in a unit, 4 or 3, then the Interstate Migrant Workers Act will not apply. So this numbers threshold is also another shortcoming in the law. And then the law places certain obligations on the employer. It also places certain obligations on the contractors. The contractors are supposed to ensure timely payment of wages. They have to ensure at least the minimum wages are paid. If the migrant workers are doing the same or similar kind of work as the regular workers in the establishment, they're supposed to be paid wages on par with the regular workers. That may not happen in practice, but that's what the law provides for. And the law also provides for the payment of a displacement allowance. It provides for the payment of a journey allowance. It requires the contractor to provide suitable residential accommodation for the migrant workers. It also requires the proper protective clothing to be provided to the migrant workers and so on. But however, this will not suffice. Particularly this situation, the plight of the migrant workers pursuant to the imposition of the lockdown has clearly exposed the lack of implementation of the law. As Mr. Indraprakash Singh has pointed out, this is a law observed more in breach than in implementation. It's implemented more in breach. But forgetting the implementation bit for a minute, let me point out some other shortcomings in the law. So one is the definitional aspect. I spoke about the definition, then the numbers threshold. Apart from these shortcomings, there are no provisions relating to social security in the law. No provisions relating to social security. And when we take the situation of the interstate migrant workers, it's not just about their conditions of work, but it's also about access. They need access to the public distribution system, then access for their children to educational facilities. Then they need access to decent healthcare systems, like our urban healthcare systems in certain cases. So that access is not provided for under the law. Then the law is also not gender sensitive. There is only one provision which refers to payment of equal wages for equal work for male and women workers, but nothing else relating to women. And there's also this category of single women migrant workers. Nothing, no kind of provisions relating to safety for and the welfare of the single women migrant workers, or decent accommodation for single women migrant workers. Nothing about that is there. And then sexual harassment is another issue. So the issue of sexual harassment, though there is of course a separate law which applies to all workers in the informal economy as well, but that issue also needs to be addressed because it's a major issue. Sexual harassment of interstate migrant workers is also something that needs to be adequately covered by the law. Now, when we look at the way forward, this act itself for years, unfortunately, this is prior to the COVID crisis, many state governments had been pushing for the repeal of this law. They were saying anyway, no one observes this law, so might as well get done with it and repeal it, because you have the Building and Construction Workers Act, other acts which apply to migrant workers, so we don't need this law at all. Then the draft code on occupational safety and health and working conditions has been framed by the central government, which subsumes 13 laws into itself. And one of the laws is the Interstate Migrant Workers Act. And there's a slight change in definition under the draft occupational and safety and health code. There is one chapter which combines provisions relating both to to contract workers and interstate migrant workers. There's no separate chapter relating to interstate migrant workers. They're clubbed together along with contract workers. But there is a change in the definition. There is no assumption that interstate migrant worker is one who has been recruited by a contractor in one state for his employment in another. So, even if a person is directly recruited by an employer, they can be covered by the code if the code were to become a law. So that is one positive feature, but then it also proposes to introduce a wage ceiling. So which is not there at present, that they say an interstate migrant worker will be one who draws wage below a particular ceiling, that is going to be notified. The rest of the provisions are more or less like what is there in the Interstate Migrant Workers Act at present, which means it really doesn't take the law forward. So the Parliamentary Standing Committee, to whom the draft code on occupational safety and health was referred for examination, the Parliamentary Standing Committee made certain recommendations in February this year. And one of the recommendations is the chapter on interstate migrant workers should be distinct and separate from that relating to contract workers, and that contract workers and interstate migrant workers cannot be clubbed together in one chapter. Then the Parliamentary Standing Committee has also said there are not sufficient provisions relating to the welfare of migrant workers. And it has drawn upon examples from what is being done in Kerala and Odisha, the good practices in Kerala and Odisha. So the committee has recommended that there should be a support desk for migrant workers in the receiving state. Then there should be helplines for migrant workers. There should be educational facilities for their children, hostels for their children, and so on. So these are some of the recommendations which are yet to be implemented. These recommendations were made in February 2020, and after that we have the lockdown. So, but hopefully all this will be taken into consideration. And similarly, there also needs to be policies on migrant workers, both at the national level and state level. Suitable policies need to be framed for their welfare. There's again a lacuna in that area as well. So I hope all these issues, these shortcomings in law and policy will be addressed by the central government as well as by the state government. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, ma'am. Our next speaker is Mr. Madan. If you can share from your experience of hearing first-hand account of migrant workers and what you think is missing.
Okay, very good evening to all the participants and all the esteemed speakers. So I think most of the topics related to this issue have been more or less covered. So I'll just share my experience as a legal aid counsel of what I had experienced at a construction site in Delhi, the NBCC site. It's a prominent commercial and residential complex for central government employees, and it's a big construction site. And there's a 2-3 labor camps there, housing about 500 workers over there. So I had spent almost 2 weeks there and personally interacted with close to 150 workers on an individual level. So lots of observations came about in that particular session for 2 weeks. The first and foremost glaring observation is that the reality at the policy level and at the ground level is very different from what is happening. There's a huge difference in what is proposed at the policy level, what the law says, and how it is being implemented for the people who actually are, require it, is nowhere near it. So obviously there is no concept of labor card. None of the laborers whom I had interacted with, they do not have any labor card. They haven't heard about anything about labor registration, labor department. So lack of awareness, lack of sensitization of what exactly system is there for their benefit is not there. One of the suggestions that I have, obviously, see, laws are obviously there, and it's a fact that laws are not being implemented. So coming about with more laws will complicate issues. I'm also aware that there's a wage code 2019 pending before the parliament, and which covers a lot of labor laws. That is there. But how do we leverage, how do we use the existing framework to at least ensure at a basic and reasonable level of the benefits, the schemes, and at least the basic structure that has to be followed? So what I think is that we have to leverage technology to ensure that at least the basic labor laws are being followed at the ground level. So on the lines of, let's say, National Crime Records Bureau or a national judicial data grid, I think a national database of contractors and workers, not just workers, but employers, be it, be it a government project, be it a private project, be it a public-private partnership, one aspect should be covered under that. Contractors should be covered as part of that database, and the workers, irrespective of their domicile, irrespective of their state, irrespective of their present location, previous location, everything should be mapped using technology. And we have a unified Aadhaar database across the country. I believe there is a one nation, one ration card being also proposed, or at least it's in the pipeline, that something of that should be there to ensure that the public distribution system is effectively implemented. I think by using technology, we can map all these things together and create a separate entire database of all workers, all contractors, and all employers in that sense. And in that way, every scheme, every benefit can reach to the grassroots level, and there can be a proper mapping of it. So that's what I propose. And one more aspect that I would like to highlight is that we'll have to differentiate between short-term workers and long-term workers. So there are a lot of laborers who just go to a particular place or migrate to a different city or different state for a short period of time, let's say 10 months, 11 months, 6 months. They do that particular work and they come back to their home state. The other is the long-term laborers who are there at a particular construction site or at a particular city or a particular state for a long period of time, let's say 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, maybe even beyond that. So in that sense, we'll have to differentiate of whether they actually comprise of migrants or whether they actually form part of the mechanism of that particular state where they have been residing for a long period of time. So I will not go into the lacunas which are there. I mean, most of it has already been covered. So what, in totality, what I feel is that we can very much use technology. I think we have the resources and we have, the bandwidth as well. And I think by combining technology and, human-made understanding of the subjects, by involving people at the grassroots level, NGOs, civil society, labor departments, officials from the labor ministry, try and gauge what hindrances are there in implementation of labor laws, and then combine all this using technology and form a national database of workers, companies, and contractors, and then the implementation can be gauged of how successful or not successful it is. So by this, I would just like to conclude, and I won't take much time beyond this.
Thank you so much, Madan. Thank you. It was really, really valuable. Ms. Gopalakrishnan, there was a question on the suspension of labor laws. So if you could take that, and in the meantime, whoever wants to ask a question can raise their hands. We'll unmute.
So about the suspension of labor laws, the government of UP has drafted an ordinance called the UP Temporary Exemption from Certain Labor Laws Ordinance, and the ordinance is yet to be promulgated because the president is yet to give its assent to the ordinance. But if the ordinance were to become a law, it will have dangerous implications, because then it would mean that only a few labor laws will apply in the state of Uttar Pradesh. And those would be the Bonded Labor System Abolition Act that will continue to apply to factories and manufacturing establishments. Then the Employees Compensation Act will continue to apply. Then the provisions relating to women and children in the labor laws will continue to apply. Minimum wages will have to be paid. And Section 5 of the Payment of Wages Act, which says when wages should be paid. Only those provisions will apply to factories and other manufacturing establishments, but all other labor laws will not apply for a period of 3 years in the state of Uttar Pradesh. And another exception which I forgot to mention is the safety provisions in the Factories Act and in the Building and Other Construction Workers Act. That will also continue to apply. But the other provisions in the Factories Act relating to labor inspection, relating to health, welfare, provision of amenities, those will also not apply for a period of 3 years. And this has dangerous implications, because it means none of the laws relating to industrial relations will apply for 3 years. That is, the Trade Unions Act will not apply, the Industrial Disputes Act will not apply.
Contract labor.
Yeah, that's in conditions of work. I was just going subject wise. So when you look at industrial relations, all the three will not apply. The ID Act, the Trade Unions Act, and the Standing Orders Act, which means the workers will not have any right to form and join unions. They will not have any protection against unfair labor practices. They will not have any avenues for grievance redressal. They cannot engage in collective bargaining. Basically, it means that whatever wages the management will pay, they have to just take it and keep quiet, and which is probably not going to be more than the minimum wage, in which case, because they can't negotiate for fair wages. Then we look at laws relating to the conditions of work. As you pointed out, then the Contract Labor Act will not apply. And other legislations relating to occupational safety and health, for example, the Boilers Act or the Dangerous Machines Act and so on, they will not apply. Then in the arena of wages itself, the Payment of Bonus Act will not apply. So it means it has a lot of adverse implications for workers. Now, Gujarat also, what they're proposing is the minimum wages will be paid, but the text of the ordinance is still not out in the public domain as far as Gujarat is concerned. But that again, it's going to be a situation pretty similar to UP in that minimum wages will be paid, but most of the laws are not going to apply. Almost all the labor laws are not going to apply, both in the manufacturing sector and the service sector. But at least what is out in the newspapers, it says this will be applicable only to new units, meaning units which are going to be set up within a certain period after the ordinance is promulgated. But we still don't have the text of the Gujarat ordinance. And the third state which has done this kind of suspension of labor laws is Madhya Pradesh. Madhya Pradesh, for one thing, they have extended the hours of work from 8 to 12 hours in factories. And then they have also amended the Madhya Pradesh Industrial Relations Act, bringing 11 more kinds of industries under the schedule to the act, as a result of which workers in those 11 kinds of industries, they will not have a right to seek recognition of their trade unions, or if the recognition of the unions is cancelled, they cannot do anything about it. They cannot engage in collective bargaining. Again, they cannot go to conciliation or adjudication for redressal of their grievances. So again, there is an attack on freedom of association and collective bargaining rights. And Madhya Pradesh also, it has said the Industrial Disputes Act will not apply to new industries for a period of 1,000 days. So new industries are exempted from all the provisions of the Industrial Disputes Act except those relating to layoff, retrenchment, and closure, which again means the workers cannot effectively exercise their freedom of association and collective bargaining rights. So these are the three states which have made these very far-reaching changes. But apart from this, 12 other states have also extended the hours of work for factory workers from 8 to 12 hours a day, and from 48 hours to 72 hours a week. And these kinds of laws are very draconian, obviously, because the work-life balance of workers is going to be affected, and obviously their safety and health will be endangered because the workers are going to be fatigued and exhausted. Because you imagine a 12-hour work day and then the time taken for transport. So assuming a worker lives 1.5 hours away, then 16 hours of the day is gone. So it's really a very, very difficult situation for workers in the states where modifications to the labor laws have been made.
Thank you. Bhavna, if you could unmute Naveen Narayan first, followed by Shiva. Naveen, you can ask your question.
Yes, yes. I'm speaking from Jaipur, Rajasthan. As far as Rajasthan is concerned, situation is very worse here in Rajasthan. And Professor Sunita Reddy beautifully suggested think and rethink. And absolutely the word poverty and prosperity. So now here in Rajasthan, all the civil society group, yeah, if something is going on, so whether the Urban Guarantee Employment Act will be useful because Sanjay Ghosh and Vishnu completely touched because law is not implementing. If we are creating this kind of urban, so definitely the things will be worse. Is it? Am I correct? If someone want to say something, please do say something because the creation is absolutely creating lots of problems. Yeah.
Right. So anybody who would want to take the question, I cannot see Vishnu. I think he has left. If Mr. Singh would like to take this question, or Professor Reddy. Professor Reddy, are you there with us?
I think we have to, as I said, we have to rethink about urban-rural divide. And so far, even though our country, it's more than 60–70% who are still in agriculture. And we have seen that current generations are just moving out of the rural areas. So we need to really work on improving and development of villages so that the migrants who are forced to leave their villages and come to the cities, then we can see that trend changing. And then the development across the country, not just the big metropolitan cities and adding to all the problems, but then across the country.
Thank you. Thank
you. I think to that, I just want to add here, that we need to keep, I think Naveen is a very important point, that the people are coming to cities or whichever location that they dislocate to, for livelihoods, and if the livelihood security is not there, be it rural or urban, I think the livelihood security has to be there, and concomitant with that livelihood security, you need to have all other rights also. How can you have livelihood without housing? How can you have livelihood without health? Without minimum wages? So I think we need to ensure that the people who are coming from far off places, which is actually allowed by the Constitution of India. Article 19 says that. Article 21 talks about right to life as such. So these are people not by default. They are here because of particular problem. So whether urban or local, we need to be open to people's livelihoods and support them in whichever way they desire the support. So our system has to be open to that. The problem is today our systems are not porous. Our systems are not accountable. And that's the reason why it adds to every problem. Instead of solving it, it's further creating problems for even that one person that Gandhi talks about, that last person, it's not reasonable at all.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Singh. If you can unmute Shiva Prasad, please, Bhavna.
Okay, I just, am I audible?
Yes, yes.
I just have two, I don't know whether they're questions or they're issues. One is because what we have seen, the states they are the lawmakers, but that the governments I'm talking about, when they are the lawmakers, when they themselves violate the law, undermine the rights of the people, what is the role of judiciary? This is the first question. Why judiciary is silent on this? I'm talking about our courts, whether they're high or supreme. I'm not concerned about that. But they're silent. So, of course, there are some high courts which are at least reacting. The second question is, why people have to wait for pandemics or disasters to act on doing something, whether Narega or whatever be the other kinds of, programs that they have. Why can't they develop the infrastructure? Why can't they develop the local resources in order to provide employment to people there instead of people migrating to other places? Why wait for disasters and for some time they'll talk about it and forget about it afterwards?
These are more rhetorical questions, Mr. Prasad, but we'll definitely take comments from our panelists. Mr. Madan, would you like to add something to it?
Okay, so see, obviously judiciary's role is important. There's no denying that. And it's not that the courts are completely silent. Courts do take a view when issues are raised, when some facts are before them. So let's not jump to a conclusion that a particular court is silent and B particular court is very active. Let's not go into that. I think the main purpose of this session is rather than focusing on what the problem is. See, problems, we are very much aware of what the lacunas in law are, what the gaps in implementation is, why doesn't the existing laws and its benefit reach the lowest levels of our society, of where it actually matters the most. So I think we should rather focus on solutions. I think the other panel members who have spoken have very well focused on the aspect that why don't we create a system where migration of people from villages to cities is limited, and create an infrastructure, create resource system, create a mechanism where they find employment, where they find a decent and reasonable human living condition with dignity, with self-respect at their home places, at their home villages, at their home states. So I think we should focus on that. And secondly, what I believe, again, I would reiterate what I had already spoken, that I think technology can play a very game-changing role in this. We can leverage technology. I think we have a lot of resources in terms of the NSSO, census figures are there. We have the entire Aadhaar database. We have the entire, lots of databases are there at the state level, at the central level. Why not utilize it and create a mechanism on the basis of that? So that would be my answer.
Thank you, Mr. Madan. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for participating in this. Mr. Singh, do you want to say something? He wants to, I guess.
Yeah. I think quickly coming to, I think the question that Shiv Prasad raised was very important. I want to bring in here that, even for the judiciary to intervene, I must tell you that we have Justice Kailash Gambhir in Delhi. He's a High Court judge, in fact. Some of us told that, sir, why don't you write to Supreme Court judges, asking them to intervene in this migrant issue, because the court has taken no position whatsoever. And he also told that, in fact, okay, let me see. So he wrote a letter to the Chief Justice of India. Then there were a group of advocates who wrote letters to the Chief Justice of India. That's how the Supreme Court took the matter suo moto. So imagine, court is aware of all what's happening. There are hundreds and thousands of people on the streets like that, on the roads. And so for Supreme Court, they couldn't take the suo moto action until retired Chief Judge of High Court, senior advocates of Supreme Court write to him. So somewhere the problem is, I think, judiciary is the last resort. Today, somewhere, due to the way the governance is taking place, I think judiciary is also giving up its role, and it's actually melting away, withering away, which I think is dangerous for us, So we would be, this COVID crisis tells us that it happened, whatever happened to the migrants happened because our governance failed, our government failed, and all its so-called institutions till the Supreme Court failed. We need to ensure that it doesn't fail any longer. So we need to assert for the right, we need to assert for the Constitution of India to be implemented in total. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. We had a wonderful session today. Thanks to all the speakers and all the participants. Thank you so much. I think it's 7:25. It's time to close the session. Thank you.